In the 1990s, as the general public was trying to figure out the different ways they could utilize this interesting new piece of technology called the internet, so too was the US government. Even though Washington had been a key player in developing the technology that would later evolve into the World Wide Web, they didn't have any better idea how to use it than anybody else did. Outside a few universal initiatives to give government employees email addresses and to create online administrative portals for internal use, the countless federal and state institutions that exist in the country were pretty much left to create their online presences on their own, without any sort of guidance or set of standards to follow. This led to a bunch of chaotic, disconnected, and vastly different looking websites being created, which was pretty much par for the course when it came to the early internet in general. The White House would create its official website in 1994, and other federal agencies would soon follow. After an institution would create its official online presence for the first time, they would often fill out their websites with digitized versions of public records, just like the Tennessee state government. After creating their website, they would upload profiles for the different politicians that sit in the state senate. The Tennessee government still makes these profiles to this day, and the further back you look through them, the more outdated these pages look. They all seem to be frozen in the time period they were created in, with the entire user interface of the site morphing and appearing to devolve as you travel back in time through these legislator profiles. At some point, the UI disappears entirely and all we're left with is a basic white screen with some text on it, no different than a Word document. One such page seemingly stuck in a bygone era happens to be for a man named Tommy Burks. While this page might look like any other, it would soon gain a disturbing significance shortly after its creation, forever being linked to one of the strangest and darkest events to ever happen in American politics, one that you likely haven't heard of. Before we get to that though, there's something possibly even more frightening we gotta talk about. Data brokers. Have you ever stopped to think just how much personal information you're unknowingly giving out to third parties when you sign up for different apps and services on the internet? Every time you input a private piece of data on a form somewhere, you can't be totally sure where it's going to end up. Unless you read the entire terms and conditions, and come on, we both know you didn't do that. You know what this is? This is an example of a report received from a data broker on a single person. It's surprisingly detailed. We've got address history, aliases, photos, and even possible relatives, neighbors, and associates. You'd be surprised just how easy it is to get a report like this nowadays on just about anybody. These data broker companies are making insane money selling this info to whoever wants it, whether that's a scammer, a spammer, or even a stalker. It's all a little nerve-wracking, but you know what? I'm not concerned, because I use Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura protects your privacy by identifying data brokers selling your info. They take care of the hard part, automatically removing your info from these sites and making sure it never resurfaces. Aura isn't the only service of its kind, but nobody offers quite as much for the price as Aura. You'll get alerts if your personal info is found in the dark web, a secure VPN, antivirus, and even a password manager. Aura even reaches outside the internet as well, providing real-time fraud alerts for credit and banking, and even $5 million in identity theft insurance protection. It's genuinely a great deal for what you're paying. I'm not leaving myself vulnerable, and you shouldn't either. If you use my link aura.com/feral, you'll get 14 days for free, which is enough time for Aura to start scrubbing your personal info from data broker sites. Thanks to Aura for sponsoring this video. A farmer by trade, Tommy Burks had been a longtime member of the Tennessee House of Representatives. Despite being a Democrat, he held a pretty conservative social outlook, opposing things like gambling, state lotteries, and even the teaching of evolution in public schools. He was the last of a dying breed, an old-fashioned liberal pushing for legislation that aimed to help the working class. This combination of fighting for the everyman and promoting right-wing social attitudes made him quite popular in the rural district of the American South he oversaw. At the time his now long untouched online profile was created, he was campaigning to be re-elected to a seat in the state Senate, a position he had held since 1978. Burks was known as a very hard-working person. He kept his farm going throughout his entire political career, often waking up well before the sun rose to get his outdoor work done for the day, before driving 100 miles to sit for a session in the House of Representatives. Despite the long distance, he would never actually move away from his district, which was unusual among his fellow representatives and again only contributed to his already high popularity. Tommy had gone 20 years without losing a single election. He was a difficult candidate to beat, but politicians would still try, and in 1998, the Republicans chose a man named Byron Looper as a potential usurper. While Tommy had been a lifelong farmer, Byron Looper had been a politician from the onset of his adult life, having ran for the Georgia House of Representatives as a Democrat after graduating university in 1988. His campaign wouldn't get past the primary though, so he returned to his home state of Tennessee and rebranded himself as a Republican, where he would win a primary in 1994, but would ultimately fail to be elected to the House of Representatives. In 1996, however, he'd finally win an election, becoming the new Putnam County tax assessor, after he legally changed his middle name to Low Tax. Yeah, he really did do that. He had gone the entire campaign without even making a single public appearance, solely relying on negative attack ads to sway public opinion. Looper's tenure as tax assessor would be fraught with controversy. He would make multiple attempts to manipulate the news media by anonymously spreading false rumors about his political rivals, while simultaneously signal boosting his own supposed good qualities. Just 2 years into his new role, he would be slapped with several criminal charges, including official misconduct, theft of services and official oppression for theft, misuse of county property, and misuse of county employees. Byron would claim that the charges were nothing more than political theater, alleging that the mostly Democrat Tennessee General Assembly were trying to bury him with a phony criminal investigation. Not one to be deterred by legal troubles that could potentially land him in prison for a long time, Looper would launch his campaign to become Tennessee's next senator. The position wasn't his first choice. His true ambition had been to run for Congress, but he didn't win the nomination for that, so he took what he could get, which was to run against Tommy Burks. With Burks being such a popular, long-serving incumbent, the Tennessee Republican Party didn't see much of a chance of beating him, and as such, the Republican nomination had mostly been a token one, nothing more than a warm body propped up purely to maintain appearances, one that would almost certainly lose. Byron won the Republican nomination by default, as no one else had any desire to run in an unwinnable election. He would soon begin campaigning much in the same manner he had in previous elections, abstaining from all public appearances while relying on attack ads to do all his PR work for him. The voters of Tennessee's 15th Senate District didn't take the campaign seriously. They already knew and liked Tommy Burks. Why would they vote for some big city outsider who had a bunch of pending criminal charges? Tommy also wasn't concerned. For him, this was just another in a line of many elections he had been through in the past 20 years as senator. He hadn't lost before, and it certainly didn't seem like things were going to change this time. It's a brisk and foggy autumn morning on October 19th, 1998. On the Burks family farm in Monterey, Tennessee, Tommy briefly speaks to his farmhand before leaving to go pick up a class of kids from a nearby school, who he's planning to take to the pumpkin patch on his farm as a fun field trip. As he nears the road after rolling down his long gravel driveway, a car pulls up beside him. This was unusual. Burks wasn't expecting company. He rolls down his window to greet his unexpected visitor, but a loud shot rings out. Tommy Burks has been murdered. The news would quickly spread around Putnam County. People were shocked. Tommy didn't appear to have any enemies. He was a benign and respectful small-time politician who was well-liked in his community. Police too couldn't seem to come up with a potential motive. The farmhand who had discovered Burks dead in his car after hearing the gunshot said he had noticed a blue Chevrolet sedan speeding down the road, which was the only piece of information police had to go off of. The general public would reel in the uncertainty of the situation. Maybe this was some random, senseless killing committed by an insane person. Maybe Burks had some secret double life that was completely unknown to his voters. While everybody was speculating, police were quietly investigating in the background. They had a suspect, just not one they could reveal quite yet. In the midst of all this, Byron Looper would maintain his distance from the public eye. He still wouldn't make any public appearances, and he wouldn't even make a statement acknowledging the death of his political opponent. Not terribly out of character considering his past, but maybe a little suspicious at the same time. It's the middle of the night on October 23rd. Byron Looper is about to walk into his house, but before he gets to the door, somebody walks in front of him. Almost immediately he's surrounded, his arms are grabbed and something cold clicks onto his wrists. The police have found their guy. This might seem on the surface like a classic political assassination, maybe just unusual in how low the stakes were, but there is something different that sets this case apart from almost any other. You see, the car Byron had pulled up to in his house the night he was arrested was a blue Chevrolet sedan. He hadn't hired a hitman. He personally rolled up to Tommy Burks' house and murdered him himself. Byron knew he wasn't going to win the election, so his plan was to literally kill his competition. He didn't even try very hard to not get caught. He openly admitted to one of his friends that he had killed Tommy. The police had a strong case against him, but Byron had worked out a very bizarre scheme. You see, back in 1998, Tennessee state law mandated that if a candidate died less than 30 days before an election, their name must be removed from the ballot and cannot be replaced with another. Looper had found a loophole. He was going to be the only name on the ballot, and whether or not he would eventually be convicted of murder wouldn't change that. It's hard to say what his long-term goal may have been here, if he had a plan or not to somehow get a pardon for a brazen murder he committed, but in any event, Byron Looper was on course to win a state election, despite being charged with first-degree murder. Some members of the public would attempt to get Looper's name removed from the ballot, alleging that the murder charge constituted moral turpitude. Their efforts were unsuccessful. The Tennessee Republican Party would distance themselves from Byron, but they too weren't able to force him not to run. A murderer was about to be elected to the Tennessee Senate. It's November 3rd and the votes are being counted. Somehow, Byron still manages to get 1,500 votes, despite the public being shown very strong evidence that he literally killed his opponent. Luckily though, he wouldn't be elected to the Senate. Receiving more than 95% of the votes and subsequently winning in a landslide was Tommy's widow, Charlotte Burks. The Tennessee Democrats and even many Republicans launched an impromptu whirlwind campaign to get the public to write her in on voting day, which they did en masse. As Byron was going through the trial that would eventually put him in prison for life, Charlotte Burks was inaugurated into the state Senate. An online profile will be made for her as well, and on it, you'll find a line that tells the reader that Charlotte is a widow of former Senator Tommy Burks. Tommy's profile, though, has been left to rot. A relic of media created just before his death that can still be accessed and experienced in the exact same way it could while he was still alive. It's a small drop in a sea of abandoned government web pages. While normal abandoned websites usually get taken off the internet at some point due to lapsed payments, servers going offline, or companies ceasing operations, the American government has no such problems. And as a result, you can find many relics just like Tommy Burks' legislator profile on the live internet. The world of abandoned government web pages is not one that I've ever seen covered on YouTube. Probably because government websites aren't usually interesting pieces of human creativity, but nonetheless, there are horrors here. And on top of that, the pristine state these websites are almost always kept in is interesting all on its own. There's a real institutional effort to maintain and preserve these snapshots of the old internet, one that's much larger and more well-funded than an independent organization like the Internet Archive. While I may be Canadian, I'm only going to be covering things from American government institutions today. There's a couple reasons for that. For one thing, the majority of you watching are American, and also Canadian politics and government is just more boring than the US. You're not going to find a story like the murder of Tommy Burks up here. On top of that, every Canadian government webpage looks and functions like it's been abandoned. Makes it hard to find the actual long untouched stuff. So yeah, we're focusing on the USA today, a country that produces way more government websites than you probably realize, some of which are actually pretty weird. You're probably already familiar with whitehouse.gov and also FBI.gov, which we've talked about before on this channel. But what about Barney.gov? This 2003 site is dedicated to George Bush's Scottish Terrier Barney. It's complete with downloadable videos and articles all about the president's dog. Again, everything here has essentially been frozen in time. This site looks and functions in the exact same manner as it did in 2003, with everything being perfectly preserved, a true Pompeii of the old internet. There's also fiddleandforesters.gov, a 2004 federal government website dedicated to an old-timey string band made up of US Forest Service workers. Their mission is to push a message of conservation and stewardship through good old American bluegrass tunes. Obama would eventually call this site a waste of taxpayer money, and it would actually be taken fully offline and is only accessible today through the Wayback Machine. In this video, I want to talk about the forgotten pages that are still able to be experienced on the surface internet. Every time a new federal administration is inaugurated in the USA, they always seem to purge the government's online presence a bit. You can find different lists of the thousands of government-hosted websites that have been taken offline seemingly every few years. Sometimes though, these sites have a way of slipping through the cracks. Maybe they've been mirrored to another domain which went unnoticed during the purge. Maybe some other federal institution purposely mirrored the site to prevent it from being ripped from the pages of history. In any event, the internet is littered with fully functional but completely abandoned government web pages. Some are silly, most are mundane, but a select few are disturbing, like the Office of Human Radiation Experiments. This 2009 site is less pristine than the others. There's a few broken links and images here. It's common for abandoned websites to go through a process called link rot. As the internet at large evolves around them, the external resources abandoned websites use often change or go offline completely, leading to a sort of rotting process that slowly consumes a website, almost like the decay of a living organism or the ruining of an abandoned building. The links on this page are actually all completely dead, which kinda gives this whole site a bit of an ominous feeling considering the subject matter at hand here. Luckily though, I was able to find a separate mirror showing an older version of this site, although it does purport that it was last updated in 2012, but it obviously looks much older than the 2009 mirror we were just looking at. This version of the site has been kept in pristine condition. Everything is fully preserved, including the downloadable videos and images, which makes it much easier to decipher this website's purpose. It's intended to be a web portal to digitally serve up the findings of a government organization called the Office of Human Radiation Experiments. This 1994 department was enacted to investigate the USA's use of human subjects when studying the effects of radiation on living organisms during the Cold War. As you can imagine, this is a bit of a dark piece of history. These experiments were often misrepresented to the test subjects, with doctors describing them as groundbreaking new medical treatments, even though they didn't have any idea what would happen when exposing these patients to high levels of radiation in different ways. Sometimes these experiments were done without any consent from the test subject, like when 18 hospital patients were unknowingly injected with plutonium in the mid-1940s, many of whom would eventually develop different forms of cancers that would kill them. Around the same time, at Vanderbilt University, coincidentally also in Tennessee, more than 800 low-income pregnant women were given a drink dosed with radioactive iron, being told it was merely a vitamin mixture. At subsequent hospital visits, doctors would study the radiation's effects on the mothers and their babies. The long-term consequences of these sneakily administered experiments are unknown, but the mothers who got the drink reported such symptoms as rashes, bruising, hair and tooth loss, and even cancer. Possibly the most horrific case of these forced human radiation experiments was that of Vertus Hardiman. In 1927, when he was just 5 years old, he was visiting the Gibson County Hospital in Lyle Station, Indiana to get treated for his ringworm. His parents were advised to try out an experimental new therapy, but they weren't told that it would involve dosing little Vertus with high amounts of radiation, enough to make all his hair fall out. The ringworm would be cured using this method, but in the same vein as killing a spider by burning down your house. Vertus's hair would never grow back. The bones in his head would erode and shift around, molding his skull into an unnatural shape. His scalp would turn pink and red, and would be covered in blisters and bumps filled with pus. Though he would suffer from extreme pain from both constant headaches and burning sensations that would never go away, Vertus would lead his life much like anybody else. He would move to California and work for most of his life in the Los Angeles County General Hospital. He'd cover up his untreated wound with a wig, and on a surface glance, you wouldn't even be able to tell that this was a person suffering from a horrible radiation disfigurement. Vertus would eventually die at the age of 85 after his radiated skin finally became cancerous. But before he left this earth, he consented to have a documentary done about his story, which he had kept secret his entire life. Before he passed, he would do a photo shoot to reveal to the world for the first time just what he had been hiding under his wig. Despite having to be reminded every day of the enormous injustice he had experienced as a 5-year-old, Vertus Hardiman still managed to live a full and happy life. While many in his situation may have let their condition turn them vindictive and miserable, Vertus on the other hand refused to be bitter, and even managed to find it in him to forgive the doctors who had so carelessly disfigured him. He was often quoted as saying, "If you're angry, that means your heart's not right." The purpose of the Office of Human Radiation Experiments was to declassify and expose these injustices to the public. They would soon follow up by enforcing stronger regulations and opening up some compensation programs for the affected individuals who hadn't yet died, which led to some monetary settlements being reached, but no amount of money can fix a life filled with health issues, pain, and physical disfigurement. The Office of Human Radiation Experiments serves as a detailed peek into an often overlooked and tragic part of American history, one that's kept finely preserved in the form of a long-abandoned government website. This next page has also been kept in a similarly pristine manner, despite not being updated at all for 25 years. It happens to revolve around a topic that was a particularly unsettling mystery at the time of its creation. Complete with a beautiful white marble tile background and this lovely CCD camera photo of the White House, this turn of the millennium site claims to be a special oversight board. one made to reflect the findings of the DoD's investigations into the chemical and biological incidents which occurred during the Gulf War. The contents of this site are pretty dry, mostly being made up of different reports and transcripts of meetings, but the story it tells when it's all put together is indeed quite disturbing. Starting in 1990, a coalition force made up of 42 countries but primarily led by the USA would declare war on Iraq, who had just invaded their neighboring country of Kuwait. By February the following year, Kuwait had effectively been freed and a ceasefire would be called, with the entire conflict only really lasting for about 6 months. The Gulf War was the first major conflict after the fall of the Soviet Union, with President Bush deeming it at the time as the beginning of a new world order. It was a showcase for just how advanced Western military technology had become, and a true flex of the USA's might as a newly dominant world power. The ground campaign only lasted a mere 100 hours, with Iraq losing catastrophically. Tens of thousands of enemy combatants would be killed, enormous amounts of equipment and infrastructure would be demolished, and Saddam Hussein would have no choice but to surrender and agree to the UN's resolutions. As much of a victory as this was for the US and the coalition though, something quite strange was happening to the Western soldiers who had just been on the ground in the conflict. Perfectly healthy, non-injured combatants would come home and begin reporting about unexplainable health problems, including respiratory issues, headaches, muscle pain, neurological problems, and even terminal tumors. It's not uncommon for veterans to report health issues after going through a war, but the unusual thing here was the volume and consistency of these reports. Up to 35% of American soldiers who served on the ground in this conflict would endure one or more of these malignancies. That's 250,000 people all coming down with the exact same health problems. Though the ground conflict may have only lasted 4 days, these medical problems would last much longer, often growing worse as the years and decades passed. It would eventually be considered a lifelong chronic illness, with the medical community giving it the name Gulf War Syndrome. The soldiers that fought and won a war against a much weaker opponent all coming down with some unexplained ailment really sounds like something out of fiction. It harkens back to medieval stories like The Toyne, where the soldiers of Ulster are cursed with an inexplicable illness that keeps them weak and unable to fight. Gulf War Syndrome, on the other hand, is 100% real, and in the early 1990s, the US government had no idea what was happening to their veterans. Some doctors would consider these issues to be different manifestations of PTSD, but the physical ailments present in this syndrome would eventually discredit that assumption. While still not knowing what was wrong, the government would put together a committee to investigate the syndrome in the mid-90s. They would consider such causes as Middle Eastern pesticides and oil fires, but nothing was conclusive, and the Gulf War Syndrome currently plaguing hundreds of thousands of veterans remained unexplained. Is it possible that this New World Order purported by George Bush went against some unspoken law of nature, and the USA was currently experiencing a biblical plague doled out by some unknown cosmic entity that rules humanity in the universe? No, of course not, that would be crazy. It would take a very long time to identify, but by 2008, the American government would find the cause of Gulf War Syndrome. While bombarding the enemy forces, the coalition had attacked and destroyed several Iraqi chemical weapons facilities. This led to many plumes of toxic gases entering the atmosphere and unknowingly poisoning those who were in the vicinity of them, which included many Western soldiers. It was never PTSD or some theatrical plague, but rather the result of being exposed to low doses of poison gas for a prolonged period of time. Even if the explanation may have been simple, treatment certainly wasn't. It's 35 years later now, and the medical establishment is still trying to figure out the best way to help those suffering from Gulf War Syndrome. The common treatments seem to be things like cognitive behavioral therapy, aerobic exercises, mindfulness, and even yoga, which if you've ever suffered from a mysterious physical illness before, you'll know that those aren't exactly stellar options. Nowadays, Gulf War Syndrome is more like long COVID than anything else, a multi-symptomatic chronic illness that's very hard to treat. But back in the year 2000, when the Special Oversight Board website was last edited, it was still an unexplained disease that some didn't even think actually existed. It's strange clicking through these old websites knowing that they'll never change, that they'll permanently be frozen in the era they were created in. Today, we only went over the more mysterious and dark examples, but it's just as interesting to look at the more mundane stuff too. For example, you can still access the White House website just as it was on the last day of each presidential administration. Once again, you can see the user interface morph and devolve as the years roll back. It might not always be the most interesting content, but It's fascinating to see such well-preserved time capsules of internet history. That's it for today, guys. Before we go, I have a couple announcements. For one thing, by the time this video is live, I will officially be a full-time YouTuber. My last day of my job was in mid-December. I'm pretty excited about that. Having the extra time is going to make it easier for me to consistently bring you guys longer videos. I know this one was a little shorter than usual, but honestly, I just kind of need a break. I've been going at it pretty strongly for the last few months, so I'm taking a couple weeks off, and I'll see you guys again in January. Secondly, I'm participating in a YouTuber Christmas album. That's right, it's called A Terminally Online Christmas. I came up with that title, by the way. It features me along with some other creators you might know, like Jaden Salads, My Casey Valentine, and Raymundo2112. I covered Ave Maria for it, so if you want to hear me sing like Pavarotti, I'll throw a link in the description and you can check it out. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Have a very Merry Christmas and a wonderful New Year, and I'll see you all again soon. Have a good night.